Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I want to share one of my painting techniques and also do a quick demo covering a process that you can easily mimic and follow along. Over the years, I've done numerous digital paintings with this method, and this specific setup is broken down into a few main parts, including inks, flat base colors, painting on clipping mask, coloring the inks, and then shadows and highlights. I've gotten quite comfortable with this process, and I thought I'd share it with you guys and explain how I use clipping masks that you can paint right on top of those flat base colors. Once you get the hang of it, you can start to learn, experiment, and create digital paintings of your own to achieve results like these guys. After the quick demo, I'll go back to one of my old work and dissect it a bit so you can see it in action. Okay, let's dive into it and start rough sketching and inking. Here's the current reference that I have in mind, but because this is strictly a quick demo, I figured I'd stay loose and have fun with it, and not be too carried away and focused on making it look identical to the photo. Although I use reference in my art and absolutely stand by it, I want to take some liberty to change things up and add some personality and style. Otherwise, it's just a carbon copy of the photo, and that can be a little boring at times. I also like to see brushstrokes in my artwork and shapes to make it a little bit more lively. For this one particular rough sketch, I've been using brushes from Lucas Pinador, sorry if I'm butchering the name, an amazing artist that I follow for some time now. He's got some fantastic brushes and process video as well. I've been trying to experiment with this set lately, and I have to say they aren't a letdown at all. Looking closely towards the end, you can see that I'm creating the pumpkin in different sections. First with the whole body, which I call the base, then the eyes, the nose and mouth, and finally the teeth. I deliberately also broke these down into different layers and also color coordinated them so I can tell them apart. This way I can easily clean up line work smoothly. It saves me the headache of going in and erasing things in one layer instead. My advice though is if you like to sketch, go for it and spend some time on it. I do believe that the more time you spend on the drawing, the easier the painting can come alive later on. For example, if you look at the tiger painting, I actually started out with a pretty thorough sketch and eventually turned it into a whole painting. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's impossible. You can be super loose on a sketch and still achieve a decent painting at the end. The next step is introducing color to the piece by creating flat base colors. This would live all below the inks. I'll start to organize things accordingly and create them for each section. The first one that I did was the base body, which I'll label as color-base. Then another layer called color-interior, another layer called color-sides, and then finally the last one, color-stem. I also like to make an additional layer that's separate from everything else to create a color palette. It doesn't have to be precise, and this will most likely change over time as I'm painting. But usually I like to do at least 3 to 4 versions of each color that I'm going after, simply because it gives me more options and I'm not just stuck on one. And once that's organized, I'm ready to paint with clipping mask. I create a new layer on top of color-base and paint on it to give it some dimensions. I usually name these layers details. A huge benefit of using clipping mask is that I can paint right on top of it and it will only be shown within the bounds of the area below it, in this case of the color-base layer. This makes painting a lot easier since I can paint outside the lines and not worry about it at all. You can do this by simply selecting the 2 layers, right-clicking and choosing Create Clipping Mask, or pressing Alt-Ctrl-G on the keyboard. And then I finally paint. I'm zooming in, rotating the canvas a bit, and just going over things. A good rule of thumb is to start with the big shapes and then go down with smaller brushes for the details. I'm currently using another Lucas brush that I've started to get used to. Now, even though this is technically an inking brush, that doesn't mean that it's limited to one purpose. Remember, try not to get too stuck on brushes and experiment with them, since you can get different results and usage out of them. And I basically repeat the same process with the other layers, going from each of the flat base colors, creating a new layer on top of them with clipping mask on, and painting right on top of them until the whole subject matter is complete. And the beauty of the clipping mask is that it's also infinite, so you can create as many as you want until you feel comfortable. If you're curious how I'm painting and blending colors, I simply set the brush to a lower opacity and constantly use the color picker by pressing and holding on to the Alt button on the keyboard to quickly switch to the eyedropper tool. For the brush, I set the opacity anywhere from 70 to 90%, and it varies by brushes as well, since there's also pressure sensitivity that you have to account for. You can see here that I'm constantly picking the color next to it. I started off with a bright bold magenta, and as I'm going to the right side, I'm just constantly color picking to gradually transition it to the white. And you can see another example here with the greens and the reds, and finally me just messing around with a quick doodle of an apple. And now on to the inks again. So line work depends on the style you're trying to achieve. In most cases, you can see them in comic book artists with big, bold, black lines and shapes. But since I'm trying to achieve a full painting, I'd like to blend the line work seamlessly with the entire piece. And instead of painting over them, I simply lock the alpha channel and start painting over the inks by simply choosing colors that are adjacent. This method allows me to do it quickly without thinking too much about it and keeping it clean and getting away with things. You can see that if I hide everything else, my line work is full of colors at this point. If I feel like I need to bump up the shadows, I simply create a new layer that lives on top and begin to paint entirely over it. I experiment with the colors and eventually land on something purplish, bluish, set on multiply. I recommend using a few different colors and going over things since it'll always give you a different outcome. And if needed to, tweak the colors again at the ending if you want to see some further results. To get some highlights, I create another layer on top of it and set it as overlay. I'll choose something light and start painting around a little to make the image pop. These are just in some areas to give it some more dimension to the painting. So far, I've mentioned using multiply for shadows and overlay for highlights, but that doesn't mean that it's the only layer's properties at your disposal. And here's the final image of the jack-o'-lantern from start to finish, broken down into sections. We got the inks, flat base colors, painting details with clipping mask, coloring the inks, the shadows, and then the highlights. And here you can see the breakdown with this technique in this example, specifically his hand and blaster on the Mandalorian. You can see that I did this very simple line work and broke this down in different sections. In the yellow part of the gloves, I created the flat base colors, then worked my way up using clipping masks for the rendering and details. And then I do the exact same thing throughout the subject matter. And at the end, it does look a little flat, but that's where the layer blending property comes to play. You can experiment with different colors set on different layer property modes to push and pull colors and have different effects and textures. I really recommend this method, especially towards the last portion of a painting, because it can really change the whole view of things. I mentioned setting things up on multiply for shadows and overlay for highlights, but a few others that are worth checking out are screen and color dodge. Probably one of my favorites to punch things up a bit that I definitely abuse in my pieces. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video and learned a thing or two, like, comment, and subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate that. Until next time.